We have just heard in the last 3.5 hours, we've heard really an amazing history of the evolution of the entire financial sector. And green bonds have been actually at the very heart of it. And this is profoundly exciting. And by the way, something you should know is we've been talking about green. I think you do know this is not just about green, it's about all the SDGs. I mean, why should green have all these bonds? In this room, actually, are two senior representatives of the Global Commission on Education. Elizabeth Steer is the director. She happens to be my wife, but that's nothing to do with it. And Pedro Alba is the chief financial advisor to the Commission. And the reason they're here is because that commission was set up, chaired by Gordon Brown, got Jack Ma in it, got Jim Kim's in it, Larry Summers, the good and the great, Dan Goatee from Africa, a whole bunch of fantastic people. And quite frankly, they're a bit grumpy because the green side of the agenda has managed to persuade the financial sector to channel money in their direction. So your job for next year, the question was, what next year? You'll be talking about education bonds that are linked to the new, very exciting international financing facility for education. But think about, I mean, what we've heard today is sort of really three phases of the financial sector. I mean, let's be honest, those of us that did PhDs in finance, we never believed that the financial sector was anything except neutral. Well, actually, it's not true. Financial sector is not inherently a friend of the environment. The financial sector is inherently conservative. Can't afford to be conservative if you want to go into new technologies. The financial sector is inherently short-term. Can't afford to be short-term if you actually want to address environmental problems. So until 10 years ago, got to be honest, the financial sector wasn't a friend. It was a reluctant follower. And what we've seen in the last 10 years, and we've heard it today so magnificently, is phase two, which is the financial sector being an equal partner, going along in tandem with those who are actually making real investment decisions. So instead of having to persuade the financial sector, you guys have said, no, actually, we are enthusiastic about this, and we're going to issue green bonds and so on. And the green bonds have done, as Heike in her Financial Times article, many others have said, it's not so much that green bonds have driven investment decisions. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Laura, last year, 33% of the World Bank's lending had co-benefits on climate change. So you'd have to issue a lot of green bonds in order to drive that up even further. But what green bonds have done, they've changed the atmosphere, they've changed the tone, they've got a buzz both in the financial sector and in the investment sector, whether that's in the World Bank or whether it's in corporations. This is incredibly important. At the World Resources Institute, we do a lot of thinking about what is it that creates positive tipping points. Why was it that in the short 15-year period between 1985 and 2000, 130 developing countries radically improved their economic policy making? Why have they done that in such a short period of time? There's a reason. Why was it that Mr. Obama came into the White House believing that same-sex marriage didn't really make much sense legally? He left it saying, I mean, are you crazy? Everybody surely believes that we should do that. 8 years, radically. What causes that? And we do a lot of work on that. Well, obviously, I mean, simplistically, you need a very sticky message if you want to get change, and you need powerful messengers. And it seems to me what you've done in the green bond market, you've got a very sticky message. People can get their heads around it, even although, as you've all admitted, there's still a lot of fudging and we still aren't so sure on, definitions. Doesn't matter. People get it. Everywhere I go, people talk green bonds. In Katowice, which is the conference of the parties 3 weeks from now, they'll be talking green bonds. So the message is actually quite sticky. You've done a good job. Messengers that are powerful, no one's more powerful than the financial sector. And you guys are beginning to stand up and be counted in an amazingly wonderful way. And that leads us to phase three. Phase three, if one was sort of the reluctant follower, two is the sort of partner, three is the leader. And that's something that we never would have dreamt about. But it is worth asking the question, why today Are there 498 major international corporations in the world, 90 of them, by the way, in the United States, that are committed to what are called science-based targets. As science-based targets, if you're a General Motors or whoever, basically says every single year, I'm not only going to publish my greenhouse gases, but I'm going to have a target to totally decarbonize throughout my entire scope 1, 2, and 3. So I'll be totally decarbonized by 2060 or so. And here's my plan of action. And I'm going to invite people like the World Resources Institute, World Wildlife Fund, CDP, UN Global Compact, come in, check us out. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? No one is telling them to. Or are they? Governments aren't telling them to, certainly not in this country. Financial markets are starting to tell them to do it. And that's exactly what the point Mindy was making and several of you have made today. How cool is that? 2 weeks ago, I was talking to the vice chair of BlackRock. You know, he said, basically, any RFP in Europe today that they bid on, you know, says you better have some expertise on ESG. And you think how different that is for 10 years ago. Well, 12 years ago, Al Gore and Peter Knight, his campaign manager, went to Goldman Sachs and they said, you know, we got this idea of setting up a fund that would major in companies with high ESG. And Goldman Sachs says, oh, we don't really do that. But there's one guy, one partner, lives in London. His name's David Blood. Go over and see him. So they went over, met with David, and they founded Generation Capital. And I understand of the top 200 big funds in the world, it's ranked, I think, #1 right now. And it invests in ESG-strong companies. So we've crossed this incredible Rubicon intellectually, and it's part of a much bigger revolution that's gone on in our understanding between economics, economic growth, and action on sustainability. One of my board members is President Felipe Calderon of Mexico. He also has been chair of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. And recently he said to me, you know, when I was running for president, I believed that I wanted to act on climate change, but I thought there was a trade-off with the economy. So that's the way I looked at it. He said, when I then chaired the G20 and we put green growth on the theme, he said, I realized that actually they can be partners. You can have both. And he said, now, after serving as chair of the Global Commission and speaking to Nobel Prize-winning economists who are not environmentalists, they're growth specialists, he said, I now know you can't have growth without action on the environment. So we've gone from, if you like, it's a conflict, it's possibly able to have it both ways, to you can only have growth with that. This is an amazing transition, and that's exactly why we are extremely well positioned. And incidentally, the logic of the new climate economy, as you call it, was act smartly on climate change and the environment. That leads to greater economic efficiency. Act smartly on climate and the environment, it leads to new technologies and new opportunities. Be clear about your action on climate change. It leads to long-term predictability of policies, which in turn will lead to more investment. And that logic, those threefold sort of aspects together, make a really compelling story. And that's exactly why we are so well positioned today and why you guys deserve a huge amount of thanks. But looking forward, it's incredibly important we don't kid ourselves, the battle's won. I mean, everybody has said that. We are in very dire straits right now. We're losing the battle. Yes, we're going faster, but the van is going even faster away from us. The gap is increasing. And the worst thing we could do as rightly proud issuers of green bonds is to say, my word, last year we issued $300 billion of green bonds, job done. No, it's not. We need to be much tougher on ourselves on impact. Now, the most important impact is that impact that relates to changing the atmosphere, changing the financial sector, changing multilateral development banks. Laura deserves a Nobel Prize for getting 33% of her portfolio with climate co-benefits. But next year, they'll say, what's next? And the answer is, what's next is the other 67%. The World Bank needs to be able to say, we are the solution. Here's my entire portfolio. And people in this room, by the way, you're heading in that direction extremely well, by the way, so there's not a criticism, but that's what is going to be expected next year and the following year, and people in this room can help get us there. I also do think that we need this issue of a sort of additionality, if you like, is an old issue. We've got to be honest, there hasn't been much additionality, narrowly defined. There's been massive additionality if you take that second order, bigger impact that you've had. But moving forward, I think we should also ask, how many times does a green bond actually lead to an investment that wouldn't take place? And I think we're now starting to see some that are well designed. Laura talked about some. I've got a feeling that the blue bond that Seychelles did, maybe that would have not been so possible. We worked just 2 weeks ago, we launched with a wonderful group called Blue Forest Conservation in California, called a Forest Resilient Bond. And the Forest Resilient Bond, basically, the stream of income comes from a whole set of players, none of whom could have put the money up themselves. Water utilities, electricity utilities, US Forest Service, and so on. That investment would not have taken place without the design of that. And I think we ought to be thinking about that. Adaptation's another area where, quite frankly, only 1% of green bonds have gone into adaptation. We need to get with the program. There's now a global commission on adaptation. We ought to engage with that. There's going to be a major chapter there on finance. So look, let me stop because lunch is waiting. I want to congratulate the World Bank, you, Heike, all of you that have done such an amazing job, and SEB and other people in this room. You know, Victor Hugo, the great French philosopher, he said there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And what we're talking about this morning is an idea whose time has come in spades. And the great American philosopher, Elvis Presley, he reminded me of him actually when you were talking today, because he said what we need is a little less conversation and a little more action. And what the great thing about you guys today is that you provided conversation that was so stimulating that we're all going to leave this place and go out and act some more. Thank you very much.